I work in a cancer hospital where the skill levels are high, so the failure rates of the biopsy is much lesser. But there are enough number of reports in the world literature which says when a biopsy is done in a general hospital where it is not a usual practice to treat lung cancer, the biopsy failure rates is higher. So first and foremost is the level of skill.
Join me in welcoming Dr. Anurag Mehta. He is Principal Director Laboratory, Molecular Diagnosis and Transfusion Services at Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institute and Research Center, New Delhi.
The PDL1 is another marker which can be tested only by IHC. The ROS1, one can use IHC as a screening tool, but because the false positivity rate is high, so one has to confirm it by FISH. Now we are actually shifting from this mindset to doing a liquid biopsy upfront with the tissue, NGS. So the liquid biopsy can give you faster results. It can probably convert into a result in 5 to 7 days. So I think the testing has to become cheaper. The insurance agencies have to be motivated to allow for molecular testing. NGS and other tools of the precision medicine should be available in smaller labs in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And this will require that the equipments are robust and there are more places where they can receive training.
A common misconception about lung cancer testing you often encounter.
Testing is expensive. The treatment is several-fold more expensive. Now that we know that targeted therapies in advanced lung cancer can prolong survival from at least 1.4 years to several years, 7 years, 8 years. Patients with L-fusion rearrangement can live up to 7.5 years. Saying that testing is expensive, that's a greatest myth that needs to be dispelled, especially in light of the cost of the treatments.
So, Lung Cancer Awareness Month highlights early detection and advanced diagnosis to improve outcomes for patients living with it. This podcast, From Biopsy to Biomarker, Precision Diagnosis in Lung Cancer, organized by Voice of Healthcare and supported by Roche, focuses on how tissue sampling and molecular testing guide targeted therapies, making treatment more accurate, precise, and effective for patients living with it. Join me in welcoming Dr. Anurag Mehta. He is Principal Director Laboratory, Molecular Diagnosis and Transfusion Services at Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institute and Research Center, New Delhi. He is a senior pathologist with over 30 years of experience in different areas of pathology. He is especially interested in molecular biology and diagnostics and serves as editor-in-chief of Journal of Current Oncology, which focuses on new developments in cancer biology and management. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. Really appreciate.
Sir, to start with, in the Indian context, what are the most critical challenges in the biopsy to diagnostic pathway, from choosing the right biopsy technique to ensuring timely reporting, and how do these gaps affect treatment decisions for lung cancer patients?
So it's crucial to diagnose any cancer in the early stage to successfully treat it. Unfortunately, in lung cancer, majority of the cases are diagnosed when they're advanced, and only palliative care can be given. So biggest challenge is for the patient to reach the right center. Most of the patients with the lung opacities get treated for tuberculosis for months together before they reach the right center where a biopsy is ordered, the right kind of imaging is ordered, and a diagnosis is made. So I think the biggest challenge in the course of the treatment is reaching the right hospital at the right time and getting the biopsy done as early as possible. That's the big challenge.
I agree, sir, because we have to diagnose first and then treat it, and earlier detection is, I think, the key. When faced with suspected lung malignancy, how should clinician approach the choice between various types of biopsies like endobronchial ultrasound guided TBNA, TTNA, and bronchoscopic biopsy, especially in relation to tumor location, patient comorbidities, and the need for adequate tissue for molecular testing?
This is a slightly complex question to answer. It depends upon what kind of imaging inputs have been received. If the idea is if it is an early cancer and the idea is to resect it, the pathway is different. But if it is an advanced cancer, which majority of the instances it is, then after the imaging has been completed, it has been established that it is an advanced disease, a biopsy is required to confirm the diagnosis. If the lesion is peripheral, then it is the transthoracic biopsy. But if the lesion is central, endobronchial or a transbronchial biopsy is done, depending upon the nature of the lesion. The EBUS is done before actually decide if there are only mediastinal nodes which are accessible, or for deciding whether a tumor is truly resectable or not resectable. So these are the various modalities which are used for biopsy. And apart from doing these biopsies for making a diagnosis, sometimes we use liquid biopsy in addition for biomarker testing, especially in the cases where a targeted therapy is likely to help.
Right, sir. So I think when biopsy is taken, and as a pathologist, sir, you must have come across that sample inadequacy remains a major reason for repeat biopsies. What technical and procedural factors most commonly compromise sample quality, and what best practices can radiologists and pulmonologists adopt to improve tissue sufficiency for both histology and molecular profiling?
I think it depends upon the skill, and I work in a cancer hospital where the skill levels are high, so the failure rates of the biopsy is much lesser. But there are enough number of reports in the world literature which says when a biopsy is done in a general hospital where it is not a usual practice to treat lung cancer, the biopsy failure rates is higher. So first and foremost is the level of skill, and I think in these days when we need to do a lot with the tissue in terms of the biomarker testing, we require a certain number of cores. So usually it is believed that 4 cores of 1 centimeter each should be obtained, and preferably from not the center of the tumor, but from the periphery of the tumor, where one is most likely to get a viable tissue.
Right, sir. And in small and fragmented lung biopsies, how do you practice tissue stewardship, which I believe is very important, balancing the need for morphology, ISC, and molecular tests while ensuring enough material is preserved for comprehensive biomarker testing?
So this is a very important question, and I think this really addresses the core of the diagnostics in lung cancer. Tissue stewardship basically aligns the 3 phases of testing: the pre-analytical, the analytical, and the post-analytical. So one has to ensure that all the 3 phases are taken good control of. So pre-analytical begins with the proper fixation. The tissue must be fixed in adequate amount of fixative. It must get fixed within half an hour of removal from from the body. The best fixation is between 6 hours to 24 hours, but we permit fixation from 6 to 48 hours, and the fixation should be done in neutral buffered formally. The tissue processing should be tightly controlled. Before processing the tissue, it is a usual practice to stain the core with eosin so that they become visible in the paraffin block. But this eosin is an inhibitor for molecular testing. So staining with the eosin of the biopsy cores to make them visible in the paraffin block should not be practiced. And one should block one core in one uh, paraffin block. Uh, that way you can make more sections and use the cores more judiciously. So one should economize on the use of the tissue rather than on the cost. So that should be the philosophy here. And once the blocks are ready, we cut adequate number of sections up front. So we cut 4 sections for making a diagnosis, one for HE, and one we use for TTF, for immunohistochemistry, and for a P40. So or sometime for a musicarmin stain. So at the most 4 sections should be used, and the rest of the block should be preserved for biomarker testing. Even for the biomarker testing, for example, L can be done by IHC, PDL1 can be done by IHC. So some few additional sections are taken in the first setting itself. and we conserve the tissue as much as possible. And even after the diagnosis has been established, we again try to economize on the use of tissue. We extract the DNA and RNA, quantify them, and then ensure that we use them judiciously to do as much of a testing as is required.
Right, sir. And I think it's the holistic approach. We need molecular and we need ISTs now to give the targeted therapies. So moving on, sir, ISC markers such as TTF1, P40, NAPSINA remain essential in subtyping lung cancers. How do you interpret these markers in borderline or poorly differentiated samples, and how do they influence subsequent molecular testing?
So, really speaking, we don't use too many IHCs.
Okay.
So, we use only P40 and TTF1,
Okay.
unless and until it has been informed to us by the physician that this could likely be a metastasis from some site. We need to work out the origin of this, the tissue of origin of this metastasis. If the physicians consider that this is a primary lung carcinoma, then we just use TTF and P40. If P40 is positive, it is squamous carcinoma. If TDF is positive, it is adenocarcinoma. If none is positive, or there is an ambiguous or conflicting staining, we call it non-small cell carcinoma and not otherwise specified. And these are also the cases which should then be treated as non-small cell carcinoma, adenocarcinoma, and undergo molecular testing. So we really speaking economize on the use of tissue so that the biomarker testing can be done. And this is the philosophy that has been perpetuated over a period of, let's say, past 5 years in the interest of saving tissue and not just going hammer and tong to make a tissue of origin diagnosis.
Right. And so for biomarker like ALK and ROS1, I believe that fluorescent in situ hybridization or in situ hybridization play a critical confirmatory role. In which clinical scenario is FISH absolutely indispensable, and when can ISC alone be trusted for initiating targeted therapies?
So, as far as the ALK is concerned, there is an approval to use only IHC. The PDL1 is another marker which can be tested only by IHC. The ROS1, one can use IHC as a screening tool, but because the false positivity rate is high, so one has to confirm it by FISH. So this is one situation where if a confirmation by fluorescent in situ hybridization is required. But if you are actually indulging in single gene assays and you are not using broad molecular profiling using an NGS or some other tool, or by multiplex PCR, then probably in the second or third lap of testing, you will need to do FISH for RAD fusion rearrangement, NTRK fusion rearrangement, and an emerging biomarker called NRG1 fusion rearrangement. So FISH can be useful as a single gene assay in about 4 to 5 fusion rearrangements, but we in practice do only practice. We don't do FISH too often. These days we don't do FISH too often. We do ALK by IHC, and the rest everything is done by NGS.
Right. So that is why NGS has become central to modern lung cancer care. How do you decide when to order upfront NGS versus stepwise single gene testing, particularly in adenocarcinoma patients where multiple actionable mutations may be present?
So these days, virtually, at least in my hospital, about 94% of the patients of lung cancer undergo next generation sequencing. And next generation sequencing is useful in the sense that about 40 to 50% of the cases can be assigned to targeted therapy. About 30% to EGFR, 7% to ALK fusion rearrangement, and then 2.5% to ROS, 1% to RAD. So you get about 40 to 50% of the patient who can receive targeted therapy. But if you do Single gene assays, probably you will start with the EGFR and ALK, the more frequent one, and then only in the second lab test some others by fluorescent in situ hybridization. And by the time you finish the entire set of actionable biomarker, 9 or 10 of them, probably you will breach the requirement of the turnaround time. The cost will also escalate, and probably that will turn more costly than the next generation sequencing. So I think we, truly speaking, so far have been doing EGFR and ALK, the two more common alterations, because they account for about 35 to 40% of the lung adenocarcinoma cases. So these we do as a single gene assays because we get the results in 3 to 5 days time, and we also simultaneously do NGS. So we use a hybrid approach, and the NGS then takes care of the other 7 or 8 actionable biomarker. And so now we are actually shifting from this mindset to doing a liquid biopsy upfront with uh, the tissue NGS. And so the liquid biopsy can give you faster results. It can probably convert into a result in 5 to 7 days, keeping the turnaround time in control.
Yes, sir. So I think it's become so handy that we can club these the tissue biomarkers you're
Yeah.
saying and the liquid biopsy.
Absolutely, that's true.
And from a laboratory perspective, sir, what are the biggest logistical and technical hurdles in implementing high quality molecular diagnostics, such as DNA quality, assay sensitivity, TAT, bioinformatics, and how do these impact routine oncology workflow?
It all begins with how you have actually handled the tissue. So the first thing is that tissue is precious, and this must be kept in mind even by those laboratories where the molecular testing is outsourced. Because if they don't take care of their tissues, then probably the lab which is offering services cannot do anything. So we, as I said earlier, that we have to ensure that the fixation is proper, it is in neutral buffered formalin, that adequate tissue has been left available to do biomarker testing. And there is this practice of cutting long ribbons and putting them on the slides. So you again waste tissue. So none of that should be encouraged. You should only cut one section and do the HE staining. So first is, as always, that conserve tissue, use tissue very judiciously. And then the next step is taking sections from these blocks to extract DNA and RNA. And we generally use 10 micrometer, 10 sections. So, which is not too much. Basically, 100 micrometer is just about 0.1 millimeter. So it is not too much. It can be easily done. So we take these two sections to extract DNA and RNA. One thing one must ensure is that after each case, the microtome knife is changed, because the knife can carry some tissue from the previous biopsy, and that can lead to contamination. So a fresh knife, and every time a sections are being cut for molecular testing from a different sample, the knife should be changed. So this is what we follow. And then we do stringent quality checks on the extracted RNA and DNA. Because if you start with the bad RNA and bad DNA, the rest of the steps will automatically go awry. So we ensure, so we maintain a worksheet, and once the DNA has been extracted, its quality is checked by spectrophotometry. Whether it is a double-stranded DNA is checked by fluorometry, and we also run them on a PCR to see whether the DNA is actually amplifiable or not. Sometimes the quantity may be adequate, but it may not be amplifiable. So we check the amplifiability, and we repeat exactly the same thing with the RNA also. Check the quantity of RNA, and we run a TACMAN assay after the first step of converting it into ctDNA to see that it is again amplifiable, and amplifiable at the right rates. So and thereafter, it is making the library, ensuring that the insert size are proper. Again, for this we use quality checks. And finally, it is the template and sequencing. And after the sequencing, the the data is analyzed using the bioinformatic pipelines. So most of what we do in Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institute, we have integrated pipelines, and we also use some platforms where the pipelines have been developed and validated by us. So we have a bioinformatician in our team, and we also seek help from the vendor to supply us with the bioinformatic support. And subsequently, I think finally we do lots of external quality assurances. We participate with the EMQN, European Molecular Quality Network. We also participate in a external quality assurance program run by Tata Memorial Hospitals. So these, and we also use some external control for measuring the what is called the variant and also the variant allele frequencies. So we do very stringent quality control and quality assurances, so that our results are of highest quality and really useful for taking the appropriate decision for patient care.
Right, sir. And sir, how do you see the interplay between tissue and plasma-based diagnostics in lung cancer? And in which situations do liquid biopsies significantly enhance clinical decision making, such as inadequate tissue we have been talking about, or monitoring resistance, or rapid turnaround needs?
So I think as far as the guidelines are concerned, the guidelines are very clear that we have to use them when tissue is unavailable. And that can, as I said, can become truly a reason in those hospitals where the skill levels for biopsy taking are not as good as in RGCI, especially in the general hospitals and not the cancer hospitals. So tissue not available is one reason to do the liquid biopsy. The second reason to do liquid biopsy will be when a patient is moribund and you don't have the luxury of waiting for 2 to 3 weeks for an NGS result to come. So you can use a liquid biopsy, requires lesser preparation. So in those cases which are moribund, probably you will use liquid biopsy so that the patient who is unlikely to uh, tolerate chemotherapy will tolerate a targeted therapy if a target is found, but doesn't have a luxury of waiting for 3 weeks. So these are the two instances where liquid biopsy is very useful. Liquid biopsy has been promoted to also uh, be used for monitoring residual disease, MRD, monitoring the response to therapy. But those are not part of the guidelines. Some physicians may do it out of their own.
That is really informative, sir. So, if there is a discordance between liquid biopsy and tissue results, can it be confusing for the clinicians? And how should one interpret a scenario where plasma detects a mutation but tissue doesn't, or vice versa? And what validation steps are recommended before modifying their therapy?
So usually the false positive results are not very common. If you have a alteration either in the plasma or in the tissue, probably it's a true alteration. And since you have already done the NGS, and so on the liquid biopsy as well as on the tissue biopsy, you really don't have any other superior platform to cross check. And so either is positive, I think it can be taken as a positive and the patient can be treated. If there is truly a strong suspicion, then one of the result is wrong, then probably you have to repeat the whole run.
Yeah.
Because you suspect it is wrong, then you have to extract the DNA, RNA again and rerun the test. Or maybe, if you have, let's say, digital PCR and an assay available for that biomarker, you can cross-check on digital PCR with that for that biomarker. But unfortunately, digital PCR is good for EGFR. Maybe few labs will have droplet digital PCR for ALK fusion rearrangements, but digital PCRs are not available for most of the molecular biomarkers. So I think in that case, either you rely upon the result of the test, and I will think that false positive rates are very low unless there is a contamination. So one can and so if a laboratory is sophisticated and it has a good bioinformatician, it can do what is called a genomic ID check.
Okay.
So our bioinformatician is trained to do the genomic ID check. So by doing the genomic ID check, we can recognize whether a sample has been contaminated or not. And if it is not contaminated, and let's say it is showing an EGFR canonical alteration or an ALK fusion rearrangement, then it is unlikely to be false positive. So that can be used as a biomarker for therapy decisions.
So discordance is less.
Discordance, as far as the positive is concerned, if it is, I will say, if it is positive in the liquid biopsy, then it is false negative in the tissue.
Right.
If it is positive in the tissue,
Yeah.
then it is false negative in the
I got it.
in the liquid biopsy.
So we can either cross check or rerun.
Absolutely.
So, limited infrastructure, varying clinician awareness, and cost constraints continue to hinder uniform biomarker adoption. What do you believe are the most urgent systemic changes India needs to improve access to precision diagnostics, especially in tier 2 and tier 3 cities?
Absolutely wonderful question, close to my heart. So I think the testing has to become cheaper. The insurance agencies have to be motivated to allow for molecular testing, pay for molecular testing, and especially NGS. And I think the NGS and other tools of the precision medicine should be available in smaller labs in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And this will require that the equipments are robust, that the equipment don't need too much of handling, that the maintenance, they have a very low maintenance, and the maintenance is available to them. The manpower is trained by the vendor, and there are more places where they can receive training. I think we also need the informatics support, and we shall have the bioinformatic pipelines, and other informatics should have what is say pass and proceed kind of a system, that if something has happened, it must meet the quality standards, and then only it should proceed to the next step. So, and we need a regulatory framework also, because this mushrooming of labs without the quality checks and trained manpower can also do lots of harm, and create a sort of environment where the reports are not trusted, and instead of making the precision oncology or precision therapy available to more people, that can create skepticism. And I think the other is that there should be some sort of a patient assistant programs, which many of these manufacturers of the targeted therapies are providing. Probably they shall extend this facility into tier 2 and tier 3 cities also.
Yeah, right, sir. And so, looking ahead, what upcoming tools for rapid molecular assays, AI driven pathology, spatial transcriptomics, digital pathology networks do you think will most significantly improve the speed and accuracy of lung cancer diagnosis over next decade?
I think we will probably be using more tools, but NGS will remain, as long as we. So of the many omics that we use in the precision oncology field, the transcriptomic and genomics are the foundational ones. We rely as of now on these two tools. So therefore, we will need next generation sequencer that can actually resolve our need for both genomics and transcriptomics. But in coming times, when we will probably need the help of the epigenomics, etc., also, we will need additional tools. We will need the tools that can give us the methylomic profiles of the target genes, and there are other omics which may also come into play. Probably we will need more tools for those omics. Let's take for example early detection of lung cancer. So we have a tool which is called OncoVerix, and which is based upon metabolomics. So that will require a liquid chromatography mass spectroscopy. We have early detection tools which are based on fragmentomics and methylomics. So we will require the tools to do methylomics, and fragmentomics is a sort of a omic that depends almost entirely on very strong informatics and machine learning tools. So that will probably use lots of AI. And digital imaging is concerned, I guess already there are some therapies that require digital image analysis. I think in the breast cancer field we have something which gives us a risk of recurrence based upon the image analysis programs.
Okay.
This is probably also getting used in prostate cancer. Prostate cancer space, we also have something where digital image analysis is used to classify risk for risk stratification. And I don't recall, but I have probably read somewhere of a tool being developed for lung cancer as well. So I think all of these digital image analysis, artificial intelligence, the other tools that will study epigenomics, metabolomics, fragmentomics, they will all be useful in times to come. But as of now, I think our first goal should be to make and to democratize the availability of NGS and make the NGS more robust and with some regulatory control, so that everybody doesn't dish out a report that has not passed on the touchstones of quality metrics.
Right, sir. So I think this is the key takeaway, that we should democratize genomics. And this is the most important tool which is happening today. So, sir, let's move on to rapid fire section. One word to describe the future of lung cancer diagnostics.
More use of omics.
Right. A common misconception about lung cancer testing you often encounter.
Testing is expensive. The treatment is several fold more expensive. Now that we know that targeted therapies in advanced lung cancer can prolong survival from at least 1.4 years to several years, 7 years, 8 years. Patients with L-fusion rearrangement can live up to 7.5 years. So I think saying that testing is expensive, that's a greatest myth that needs to be dispelled, especially in light of the cost of the treatments.
And one diagnostic practice you wish every clinician consistently followed.
Allowing the pathologist to do reflex testing, that can actually help pathologists to do the testing themselves, and ensuring that adequate course of biopsies are taken. I think adequate course of biopsy, that probably is central to doing biomarker testing.
Correct. And a technique or tool you think deserves more clinical use.
Next generation
Next generation sequencing. Right. One healthcare innovation you are most excited about.
I will be very excited about something that can actually detect cancer early and is not very invasive. And I think these are multi-cancer early detection tests, which are based upon these methylomics and fragmentomics and genomic signatures. This is what is very exciting to me, because if we can detect cancers early, I think we can probably ensure longer survivals, greater survivals, better outcomes.
Right. So multi-cancer early detection.
Early
right?
detection. That's what is very appealing to me, that thought.
Yeah. So, last question, your quick message to young clinicians entering oncology and pathology.
So my message is not very this thing. I will think, just be honest to your patient and do whatever is best in their interest.
Right.
And your interest should come last and come last always.
Right.
And the patient interest should come first and first always.
So, on that note, with patient centricity, I conclude this session. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.